All right, let's talk about tax cuts. The fate of the Bush-era tax cuts. Should they be extended for everybody or just the middle class? Your opposition, Murphy, says the cuts should be extended for those making less than $250,000 a year but expire for everybody else. What do you think?
Well, let's recognize the one thing that's bipartisan right now is to sustain the people's tax cuts of 01-03. You're probably aware that 31 Blue Dog Democrats sent a letter to Speaker Pelosi. They want, this is not the time to raise taxes, not in the middle of recession. Susan, you know, I've studied history. I think you know that. What concerns me is the period of October, right after the crash, October 1929 to 1932. The decisions that we took as a government, I believe, exacerbated the situation. We went from a recession to a double-dip recession to a depression. It didn't have to be that way. And you look at what government did. You know, you look at the fact that, interestingly enough, in the first few months after the stock market crash, the Fed met, and the Fed has been widely maligned for their actions during the Depression, and I think that's been, you know, well-deserved, generally speaking, over the entire Depression. But the first few months, they actually got it right. They met in February 1930. They lowered the interest rate from 6 to 4%. They increased the money supply. The stock market began to rebound. In February to March and April, we started to recover. There was going to be a recession. The Fed was interested in increasing money supply so we could correct ourselves over time. The government then, the Congress passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. The President signed it in June. What happened is the stock market reacted poorly. 20% drop. This happened at the same time there was a drought across this country. The tariff that was thrown up is a tax increase on imports, 25,000 new commodities, and it was double the tax. When the farmers went to sell their their goods overseas, there was a trade war. Farms went under. Then the banks went under as a consequence. We started running a big deficit. And in 1931, the Congress enacted and the President signed the largest peacetime tax increase in our country's history.
We have to take a quick break, but anyone who references Smoot-Hawley gets more time. We're back with Chris Gibson. He's running against Scott Murphy for the 20th Congressional District, and on most pundits' list, this is definitely one of the seats that could flip-flop from Democrat to Republican. Chris Gibson was talking about the Depression and what happened when they raised taxes back in the 1930s, and he even referenced Smoot-Hawley. So you got to get props for that. All right, so you were going to come to a point when we had to take a break.
Well, look, the second tax increase occurred in late 1931 when the Congress passed the Revenue Act of 1932. And it was the largest peacetime tax increase in our country's history. And you'd think that given that, you'd have increase in revenues, right? Except for that didn't happen. Revenues in 1932, when the President signed this, revenues from 31 to 32 went from $2.1 billion to $1.9 billion. My point, now is not the time to raise taxes. Susan, I don't make $250,000 a year. This isn't going to help me or my family. This is about the jobs in the 20th District.
So you agreed back in the Depression, if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat it. So you agreed with what happened back in the 30s, that they wanted to increase the money supply. It was like a stimulus package for the Depression.
Well, that was on the monetary side. That's a very important point. That was not on the fiscal side. The Fed lowered the interest rate from 6 to 4%.
We can't go much lower than we are right now on that side.
Well, exactly. But the point is, I believe, what I've said all along is that what we need right now is targeted tax and regulatory relief, and to repeal and replace the health care. And the reason why is that will increase bottom line for small business owners and give all of us more disposable income, and that will be the stimulus, the private sector stimulus for our economy. You know something else that will do, Susan? That will provide confidence, and that's what's lacking right now.
All right. You want to extend the tax cuts, all of them.
Absolutely.
Now, that is going to cost money, $700 billion. At the same time, you don't think that you're upset because the stimulus is going to increase the size of the deficit.
That's right. That's right.
So how can you be on both sides?
Well, because there's not clarity. Let me provide it. The first thing you need to recognize, I believe, is that if you're going to try to balance your budget, you need to grow the private sector economy. Right now, we're spending enormous amount of money because we're at close to 10% unemployment. That's more unemployment insurance. That's more Social Security in terms of social services, and it's also less revenues that we're taking in because our economy's not growing. So we need to grow the private sector economy. The other thing that's not factored into that number is the job losses and the retraction in the economy attendant to tax hikes. So when you look at the figure, when you look at that initial figure and you subtract out the second order effect, and then you look at what could happen when we grow the economy, you'll agree that the best way to go forward is targeted tax and regulatory relief, repeal and replace the health care bill, and reduce federal spending by cutting the bureaucracy.
All right. Would you support just an extension of the tax cuts for the middle class? If that's all you could get.
Susan, listen, now is not the time. What's implied in your question is you want me to tell you how I'm going to vote on something before a bill's even written, much less read.
Absolutely. That's what reporters ask people who are running for office.
That's part of the problem. That's part of the problem right now in America is we have members of Congress that don't read the bills. We got a member of Congress right here who said, he read the bill and, essentially voted for that health care bill, and now he's trying to repeal the 1099 piece of it. He should have voted no. He was right the first time.
We'll talk to Chris Gibson about health care reform when we come back on the Capitol.
How about that for a transition?